Treasury, on the platform, members of the media, members of the public, you are all welcome. Today we are meeting with the FFC and the PBO on the 2021 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill and the 2021 Adjustment Appropriation Bill. So they'll be making presentations to us. Darren, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chairperson, we received 3 apologies. It's from Ms. Digale, Mr. Sekimam, and Ms. Peters.
Thank you so much, Darren. Just a second. Darren, who's leading PPO today?
It's Dr. Jancis, Chairperson.
FFC?
FFC, I'm not sure, Chairperson, but I see Cheng is in, and the CEO is also in, Dr. K. Brown, so I'm not sure, and Michael Sachs is in.
Okay, that's fine.
Not sure who from those are going to lead, Chair.
Commissioners, you are all welcome. I'm sure once the doctor, if she's available, she will let us know. Because I'm starting with the FFC. Can I allow the FFC to come in? We are allocating 30 minutes. So I see Dr. Mbava is in the meeting. Dr. Mbava, the commissioners and the FFC staff, you are all welcome. Dr. Jancis and all the team, you are definitely welcome. We'll start with FFC, Dr. Mbava, and we'll allocate 30 minutes to the team. So as I give you to Dr. Mbava, I'll expect to bring back my meeting exactly 30 minutes after I've started. Dr. Mbava.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, honorable members. It's a great pleasure for the FFC to be here today. We are here to present and make our submission. I have commissioners with me as well on the platform, as well as the Secretariat. Chairperson, if you allow me, I have my own opening statement that I would like to just contextualize our briefing.
Dr. Mbava, we are in your hands. The next 30 minutes is yours.
Okay, thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Chairperson. The recent economic green shoots, exemplified by positive GDP growth in the first and second quarters of 2021, augur well as a foundation for a sustained economic recovery and a stable fiscal path. However, threats to economic recovery continue to mount with pre-existing structural bottlenecks that severely constrain growth. Intermittent energy supplies, unresolved corruption, poor policymaking, and execution culminate in the loss of confidence or increased borrowing costs for the bonds we issue. South Africa must seek to avoid withdrawing its fiscal support to vulnerable citizens too early and signal to the public that its debt levels are sustainable in the long run by eliminating leakages and executing reprioritizations that are productive and constructive. The Commission Chairperson and members agrees that the revenue windfall should not be fully committed to further expanding expenditures that have already grown far beyond our means of revenue. Instead, the revenue windfall should be used to defray as much as possible the structural budget deficit and offload the growing debt service cost with redemption requirements. National debt and state-owned enterprises remain a glaring binding constraint to growth and risk to fiscal sustainability. Debt service cost is the fastest growing expenditure line item with a 10% annual average growth rate over the 2022 Mtaf, and debt service costs account for 12% of total consolidated total spending in 2021, rising to 16% in 2024-25. The detrimental effect of debt service cost crowding out social programs could lead to the total collapse of basic and social services as funds intended for core spending are diverted to servicing the debt. The Commission therefore acknowledges the difficulties in moderating debt growth within a subdued economic environment and recommends improvements in cost efficiencies of spending and closing the fiscal leakages to offset the growing deficit and debt. The Commission welcomes the 2021 medium-term budget policy statement tabled by the Minister of Finance, and in particular notes the government's efforts to maintain a modest expenditure growth while making sure that spending areas are preserved. However, the Commission remains firm on its stance that the need to exercise financial restraint to achieve fiscal prudence must not come at a net cost of the socio-economic conditions of our people to regress. With those opening statement, Chairperson and members, I wish to hand over to the head of our research to take us through the briefing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Honourable Chair members. Let me share my slide, but at the same time, just to add a little bit more, is that this presentation will, of course, be focusing on the 2021 Division of Revenue and Amendment Bill, as well as the Adjustment Appropriation Bill. To begin, though, it is always useful to remind ourselves that, first of all, this is ultimately only one pot of money that we are dividing, and so to divide that pot, it's a straight cut, zero-sum game, essentially. That as we want to commit perhaps more money to one sector or function, the money ought to have come out somewhere else. If we want to put more money into education, it means maybe it needs to come out of health. If it needs to go to bail out SOE, then money must come out of X national departments, or Y provinces, or Z municipalities, or all of the three. And so with that, a second point to add to relating to the first is that since it is a zero-sum game, there are two parts to the question. So not just that the money must go somewhere, but also where it must come from. And very often we find ourselves answering the first part and emphasizing where the money must go, but not so much where it must come from. And I submit that it's only answering 50% of the question. So with that, this time, Chair, we are focusing especially on sections 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8 of our submission. So let me jump straight over to there and hand over to Sasha, please. Thank you, Sasha.
Good morning, Chair, members of the committee and other colleagues. Chair, if you may please move to the next slide. So these next few slides provide an overview of the in-year spending adjustments that were effected during 2021-22. And the big in-year spending adjustment came with a 32.9 billion rand second special appropriation bill, which was tabled in August. And as members will recall, the largest adjustment there was to the social development vote. And that was in order to fund the extension of the social relief of distress grant, which amounted to 26.7 billion. Then with the tabling of the 2021 MTBPS, further adjustments were made to the 2021-22 in-year spending. And the larger ones are the 20.5 billion to fund the increased costs of the 2021 public sector wage agreement. And as we know, the bulk of that is at the provincial level. The second significant adjustment was to fund the implementation of the second phase of the Presidential Employment Initiative. And the second phase has a more distinct focus on youth unemployment. The third significant adjustment was the funding to assist Denal in meeting its obligations, which amounted to about 3 billion. Then finally, the fourth adjustment was to fund, the fourth largest adjustment was to fund the purchase of vaccines, and this was in the amount of 2.3 billion. So these were the large adjustments during 2021-22. And if we move to the next slide, please, Jen. The other categories that usually get reported on in the adjustment appropriation bill relates to the rollovers, which amount to 2.8 billion. And we list on that slide the departments that are responsible for the largest portion of that 2.8 billion. Underspending amounted to 2 billion, and the department driving this was the Department of Transport, and the underspending is in respect of the public network transport grant. And underspending in this conditional grant is responsible for about 69% of that total underspent amount of 2 billion. Then in terms of how all this in-year spending adjustments were funded, it was largely through drawdown on the contingency reserve, 9 billion there, using infrastructure funds that were not assigned to votes, around 4 billion, and as well as projected underspending by national government departments, and also the higher than anticipated tax revenue for 2021. Moving to the next slide, please, Jen. So in terms of the Commission's views on the in-year spending adjustment, we believe that the SOEs continue to be a drain on the fiscus. We have heard about the need to restructure, but we know that action has been slow in this regard. Likewise, regarding a sustainable approach to managing the public sector wage bill, and on this issue, we will await further details regarding the public sector remuneration strategy, which is, according to the MTBPS document, under development. No timeline regarding completion was specified in the MTBPS document, so hopefully it will come soon. And we anticipate that the strategy will provide a blueprint for how to manage this key spending item, which is also a key risk to the fiscus. Finally, we also welcome the implementation of the Youth-Focused Employment Initiative, and hopefully it will prove effective in building skills that will assist our youth in finding full-time employment. Moving to the next slide, please, Jen. The next one. Thank you. The next two slides provide a sense of government's consolidated expenditure plans over the next 3 years, and we look at it by functional category. And I guess the first point is that total consolidated spending will narrow in 2022-23, that's next year, the next financial year, and we will see a decline by 2.5% in nominal terms. When we look at the distribution of consolidated spending, the learning and culture cluster will continue to receive the largest share of the spending. It receives on average 20% of total consolidated expenditure. The second largest item is social development, and this is where your social security grants sit. And then the third largest item is your debt service costs. And that's in terms of the absolute amounts. When we look at the bottom shaded part of that table, it illustrates the year-on-year growth in nominal terms. So the third column there in the shaded part of that table shows the projected nominal growth between 2021 and 2022. So what we can expect next year. And I'll focus on this because we know that what will happen in 2023 and 2024 is subject to change over the next year or so. But according to the 2021 MTBPS, what we can expect next year is quite a wide split. I think there are only 3 spending areas that are not projected to decline. The first is your debt service costs, projected to grow quite strongly by 12.6%. So it's the third highest spending area after learning and culture and social development. And in terms of growth, it's the fastest grower. The second item illustrating positive growth is the community development category, which is set to grow by around 8%. And then the third or final area where positive growth is expected is the economic development cluster, which is set to grow by 5.5%. So these trends allude to what is being protected. And we know then that government has chosen to put particular emphasis on protecting delivery of basic services, because we know that spending on the local equitable share allocation, water and electrification programs, they all fall under the community services category. Then government is also attaching relative priority to activities aimed at kickstarting growth, and this is seen in the positive growth in the economic development functional category. Out of the social relief of distress grant in March next year. And the reductions to health and learning and culture are, of course, concerning. And in light of this, we reiterate a recommendation we made when the 2020 MTBPS was tabled. If we move to the next slide, please, Jen. And here we recommend that the spending departments indicate to Parliament how they intend to absorb the cuts, and importantly, how they will minimize the impact of these cuts on service delivery. Because it's important to understand the implications of these cuts so that we can start thinking of strategies to mitigate any negative effects. Thank you, Chair. If I may over to the next presenter.
Thank you, Sasha. Good morning, Honorable Chair. Good morning, members. So the next slides just give the indication of the allocations to provinces. So the three things to note there, firstly, is that the total provincial allocation for the next MTF amounts to 1.9 trillion rand over the 2022 MTF, and this represents about 23% nominal percent increase. So if you factor in inflation, it essentially means that in real terms, the allocations are declining. Of course, that is to be expected. And then the next issue is that there's only 20 billion added to the baseline for provinces, mainly to cater for compensation of employees. And lastly, is that the provincial equitable share is projected to decrease slightly in 2022-2023. And I think the main point we really want to really emphasize here, which is the point that we made with the portfolio of education recently, is that some provinces are already struggling to meet the threshold minimum allocation to the learners. So with this, obviously, cuts, we're going to see most provinces are going to be struggling to meet those threshold allocations to the learners and some other allocations to the health department. So it's very important here, and the commission, which is really the emphasis is making, is that we've recommended that the ongoing expenditure moderation must be on condition that this is accompanied by comprehensive reports to the affected departments, indicating to Parliament how they intend to manage tighter budgets and cushion delivery basic social services provision, and most importantly, to make sure that in the next round of the allocations, government is able to redirect the resources where the cuts have been the most severe. Next slide. The next slide here, Honorable Chair, is just to point to the members. I think the first line is just to indicate that the allocations that we see for the 2021 medium-term budget policy statement is still has not really even still far less than what was initially promised in the 2020 budget. And the reason obviously is because of the COVID-19 impact. And what we see going forward in the 2021 MTBS is that there's going to be slight decrease in the allocation for the provincial equitable share formula, which have got implication for service delivery, of course. And with respect to conditional grant, we expect to see stagnant growth in terms of some of these conditional grants to provinces. The implication thereof is that some of the planned projects which were going to be implemented through these conditional grants would have to be reprioritized or stopped, or maybe even implemented over a longer period of time, which means that projects which would have ordinarily been completed within a specified period are now going to be taking quite a long time to complete. Yeah, I think that would be it on my part. And as I hand over to Nkululi.
Thank you, Eddie. I'm going to take members through the local government slides. There are three issues to raise on the local government. There are contextual issues, the recovery process, as well as the allocations. On the contextual issues, we know that This MTPPS was presented after highly contested local government elections, and the implications of these elections is that they ushered in a record number of hung councils, 31% of the 213 contested municipalities, which means there'll be quite a number of coalitions in these municipalities. And we know the advantages and disadvantages of these coalitions, but the Commission implores the municipalities to really, or these councils to place people at the center of their decision making because of some of the disadvantages of these coalitions we have seen before. And also there's a need for stakeholders to really put in motion a number of programs and resources to capacitate new councils so that new councillors, so that service delivery is not impacted by the transitional phase. And lastly, many municipalities are undergoing the recovery process. So there is a need really for municipalities to challenge the traditional way of doing things and focus on maximizing efficiencies and pursuing those policies that leave no one behind. Next slide. The next slide looks at the allocations to the local government sphere. We know the sphere is to receive over the MTF around 450 billion, which is divided into 254 for the conditional grants, 254 billion, and about 150 billion for the conditional grants, 254 for unconditional grants, sorry. Then over the MTF, the growth is projected. Total allocations to the local government are expected to grow by 0.12%, which is a very, very low figure. But looking at the next slide, the concerns really are on the local government equitable share, which is set to grow by minus 0.4%, set to decline by that particular figure, minus 0.4%. And the concerns there we raise, and which the Commission raises, that we see that over the MTF, the poor households who benefit from the equitable share will not be protected by that particular transfer window. On the conditional grants, we see some small growth, also very low, 0.6% over the MTF. But looking at the outer years, there is negative growth on the local government equitable share. Next slide, the implications of these particular growth rates. As I've mentioned on the local government equitable share, the Commission is concerned that the poor and vulnerable will not be protected over the MTF, and as well as the progressive realization of the basic rights is really at risk over the MTF. As we can see from that graph, that the growth rates in real terms are really low over the MTF. Next slide on conditional grants. We also see the same picture, especially the two outer years where growth will be minus 0.2% and 0.4% negative growth in those two outer years. So on that one, the Commission is concerned that this low growth on conditional grants and negative growth in the outer years will not only impact negatively service delivery, but it will also impact negatively the recovery process in the local government sector, as the sector is moving out of, or the sector is looking at recovery processes, especially after this COVID pandemic. So ideally, conditional grants should exhibit some upward growth over the 21 MTF, in line with government's infrastructure-driven economic recovery program. For this particular program to succeed, there is need for conditional grants, especially infrastructure conditional grants, to be on the upward trend. Then next slide. Next slide is on a number of changes in some conditional grants. Let me move on to the last slide on the local government on recommendations. I think there are 4 recommendations there I want to highlight. The first one is that, which I think Sasha has pointed out, that the Commission believes that expenditure moderation, we see some expenditure moderation in provinces, in national government departments. What the Commission is saying there is that there is need for this to be followed by comprehensive reports from the affected government departments, indicating to Parliament how they are going to manage these tighter budgetary constraints and how they will push in service delivery, especially on social services. On the PS, we recommend that there must be protection on social services. This also applies to the local government equitable share, that there is need to protect the vulnerable who rely on these particular transfer instruments for their survival. On the local government, the Commission implores coalition councils to shun adversarial politics and place people at the center of their decision making. And also, the government should set in motion programs and resources to capacitate new councillors. And lastly, the Commission recommends the government to protect the LES as its continuous decline will compromise gains achieved in the progressive realization of basic rights. Those are the local government slides.
Thank you, Mkhululi. Let me hand over to Sabelo for the focus on compensation of employees, as it's extremely relevant, especially for the provincial sphere of governments, please.
Okay, thank you, Shane. Good morning to honorable members. What I'll do here, I'll just take you through some of the key issues that I imagine that we found with respect to the compensation of employees. And these issues have been, to a certain extent, been touched on by previous presenters. Okay, what we are noting here with respect to the compensation of employees is that this part continues to take a large chunk of our fiscals, as it absorbed about 41% of government revenue. That was in 2019, 2020. And then by 2020, 2021, that increased to about 47% of government revenue. And that shows the manner in which this is unsustainable with respect to the fiscals. And then again, compensation of employees as a percentage of total expenditure, we highlighted that is one of the issue that is of a concern because it remains high. If you look at the graph that we have there, it's above 25%. It has been above 35%. If you look around 2016-17 financial year, and it has been at least constant until 2018-19, and it only started declining in 2019-20 up to 21-22. But again, what we're highlighting here is that while there's been a slight decrease in compensation of employees in the past few years as a percentage of total expenditure, but this decrease is insignificant in bringing about the quantum of decrease to the wage bill required to ensure a budget balance surplus. And you know that since we've highlighted that this constitutes a huge percentage of government expenditure, if government has to be successful in terms of reducing its expenditure of fiscal consolidation, and then the concern of employees is one of the key things that should be addressed or looked at. And then here again, what we have done, we highlighted some of the key drivers of the rise in compensation of employees. And then in the main, what we're highlighting is that it has been the number of employees in the public sector that kept on increasing, as well as the above inflation increases in salaries of the public servants in the past. And then now what you can see, or the other thing that we're highlighting here is that there's no link or there's no evidence that would show that those increase in the public sector employee numbers is associated or is linked with increase in productivity. So that is one of the things that we're highlighting here. Okay, here we're again noting that what has been happened is that in recent years, particularly in 2020, 2021, comparing 2019 and 2020, 2021, what we're highlighting here is that the government has tried to reduce the spending, particularly in some of the key sectors that include education, police, and defense. But again, with respect to health, those efforts were undermined by the COVID-19, since more resources were required to ensure that the effect of COVID-19 is minimized or to mitigate it. So, but all in all, we see that these decreases are insignificant. Can you go back to that slide so that I can finish? Oh, okay. As you can see here, there has been an increase in headcounts with respect to health. Then what we're highlighting here is what the Commission has indicated before, that it is the Commission reiterated the importance of the strategic public employees reduction strategy to ensure that service delivery is not negatively affected. So in the process of reducing a number of employees and cutting the wage bill, but the government should be aware and make sure that this doesn't negatively affect service delivery. Next slide. Here we're just highlighting some of the key recommendations, which are two. The first one on the fiscal risk. What we are emphasizing is the importance of relooking or considering the position of SOEs guarantees given to the SOEs. And the first step here would be to establish an SOE governance framework with public reporting criteria that clearly defines detailed and precise profitability and non-financial objectives for transparency reasons. And secondly, on the concession of employees or concession costs, the Commission recommends that the government should develop a long-term plan and in an incremental manner. So it mustn't just be a once-off and a big shock to the system, and then it must be a sustainable one again. And then those are two, and the importance of linking this to productivity, those are two recommendations that are putting forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sabelo. Thank you, Honorable Chair members. So that is our submission on the 2021 MTVPS. Together with that, especially on the amendment bills relevant. Ultimately, we welcome the amendment bills as tabled, and we, despite the cuts and all the reprioritizations happening within those bills, in terms of numbers and the MTFs, we emphasize, however, the need, that second last point there, that government needs to monitor the impacts, those impacts, net impacts, implications on social services delivery, basic service delivery through regular reporting system and structures to this committee and select committee on appropriation, as well as all relevant sector portfolio committees of Parliament to account. Thank you very much. May I hand over back to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Chen. To you, Chairperson of the House.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbava and the team. You were well on time, well appreciated, setting a good example. Dr. Janchis and your team, please come in.
Good morning, Chairperson. My light is off and it's put on my light. Good morning, Chairperson, and thank you so much, panel members, and good morning, colleagues on the platform. Thank you for the opportunity, Chairperson, to bring the committee in this regard. I'm with the team on the platform who will take us through detailed presentations. I just want to give quick few remarks before opening before giving the colleagues to give us detailed presentation. I think what I want to do is I want to reinforce some of the points that we made last week during the discussion, the fiscal framework discussion. I think what we emphasized there, Chair and members, is that the fiscal policy stance is to be seen and used in light of support for the required economic development and economic growth, and support for households over and above addressing the debt and deficit issues as the current objectives are. I think we know that when we look at the adjustment, which we know that 11 billion is provisionally allocated to support residential employment program and support the livelihood program, which includes also micro enterprises and subsistence farming in that regard. Further allocations to support government salary adjustments, which also support, will support the households. But Chair and members, I think what we emphasized last week is that we believe that the discussion and debate around social spending is important and should continue, but not be open-ended, particularly also take into account those who are affected by poverty and inequality in this country. We believe, emphasize that the fiscal consideration that focus only on cutting expenditure has disproportionately affected poor households and is likely to continue to affect the poor household in the current proposals as they are. I think we quickly did a high level research on using the 2019 data sets, to talk about this issue of social spending, and that has shown that actually South Africa expenditure on social spending as a percentage of GDP is actually smaller than many other countries which have low inequality than we have in South Africa. In particular, when I look at the country with higher Gini coefficients in the OECD, which is sitting at 0.45 as a Gini coefficient, compared to us sitting at 0.62, they spend more than 12% of GDP on social spending, and we spend actually just around 6% of GDP on social spending. Therefore, our view in that regard, there could be more room for government to expand its social spending as a percentage of GDP when compared to other countries. More so, they take into account the potential macroeconomic and social implications of such spending. We continue to raise underspending trends as a concern, as we particularly thinking about the potential multiplier effect. In particular, when you look at our high-level 5-year longitudinal analysis shows that actually the payment for capital assets is a main serial underspending area over the years, and again, it's a worrying factor thinking about potential implications in that regard. We'll provide more details in that regard. The last point, Chair, as part of open remarks, really talks about the provincial and local government accounts for significant public expenditure and as a major public employers. And we look at the discussion in the literature as well in intentional expense shows that in a 3-tier governance system, a capable local government is a prerequisite and necessary to realize service delivery goals and objectives set out in the national government. Therefore, it is very important that our local government have sufficient technical and administrative capacity to realize some of the developmental indicators set out there. There has to also be greater cooperation between the provincial and local governance spheres in relation to fiscal powers in this regard. Our recent brief, Chair, on looking at revenue decline on local government, we noted that the success of the implementation of the district development model largely is linked and dependent on certain government sectors, policies, and budget. Therefore, in particular, you look at public enterprise, minerals, resources, and other sectors there. So therefore, taking away budgets from those or lack of monitoring of those sectors have direct implication for the district development model. Chairperson, those are my opening remarks. I'll come in later during the question time. So I'll give Dr. Orlandi to take us through with the team the detailed presentation. Thank you so much, Chair and members. Thank you. Dr. Orlandi?
Thank you, Dumisani. If we can just go to the introduction slide. Okay, Dumisani has covered some of it. You can continue with the next slide. Next slide. So, good morning, honourable members, and thank you, and also good morning to all the guests. I will take you through the adjustments budget section So the total estimated expenditure increases by 15 billion in the current financial year. The adjustments to the vote appropriations are offset against the provisional allocations and contingency reserve. Members, we are not going to duplicate what the Treasury already presented to you, but we are going to provide you with more detail on the significant and unforeseeable economic and financial events. We will also provide more detail on the expenditure earmarked in the 2021 budget speech. And then we will also go over the rollovers and the virements. Just at the bottom there, members to note is that the adjustments also include a contingency reserve of 2.96 billion and provisional allocations of 11 billion that have not been assigned to votes. Members, I may be wrong, but I'm not sure if this phenomena has happened before. The Treasury can correct me if I'm wrong, but I haven't seen in previous adjustments budget that there is still a contingency reserve previously. Next slide. So in terms of the national allocations, members, the baselines for 2021-22 as estimated in the 2020 Mtaf was between 3.3% and 40.7% higher than the 2020-21 revised estimate. So after the reductions in 2021 to the baseline, most departments in the table still showed a positive change since the 2020-21 revised estimates. The yellow highlights are those departments that did not request additional funding in the adjustments. So 3 of these departments also declared COE funds unspent. That was public enterprises with 17 million, higher education and training with 85 million, communications and digital technologies by 8 million. These 3 departments also increased their baselines for 2021 by 40.7%, 14.6% and 22.8% from the 2021 revised estimates. The highlighted departments also show a positive change from the 2020 revised estimates, except for Parliament that did not adjust the COE budget. A positive value for that departments have shows that departments still have fiscal space to increase personnel numbers or implement increases. A negative value means that the departments will have to reduce personnel numbers through the different options provided by government. So although the negative value of 5.6% in health is a concern, it should be noted that the numbers only selected reflect COE of national departments. Next slide. So members, the Presidential Employment Initiative will support the creation of more than 440 short-term jobs until March 2022. Other interventions are expected to catalyze growth and job creation. The allocation for livelihood support covers income support for self-employed people in areas such as subsistence farming and micro-enterprises. The table provides the detail of how departments will allocate these funds. For example, in corporate governance, transfers will go to the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency. National Treasury will increase the Neighbourhood Development Partnership Grant. In higher education and training, funds will be transferred to the National Skills Fund and also for graduate assistance. In women, youth and persons with disabilities, the National Youth Agency for Youth Development will receive 430 million. Employment and labor transfers, the money will go to transfers for GTAC, for the Jobs Fund, forestry, fisheries, and the environment will go for additional EPWP employment. And then at the bottom, you will see the equitable share that will be allocated. 6 billion was allocated for the basic education employment initiative and 120 million for the appointment of social workers and 350 million for staff and assistant nurses. Next slide. So members, before we discuss the rollovers, just a reminder of the Bfma regulations in terms of the rollovers. So in terms of part 3 on planning and budgeting, it determines that unspent funds on payments for capital assets may only be rolled over to finalize projects or assets or asset acquisitions still in progress. Savings on transfers and subsidies may not be rolled over for purposes other than originally voted for. Compensation of employees may not be rolled over, and a maximum of 5% of departments' payments for goods and services may be rolled over. Next slide. So members, the presidency requested rollovers for the implementation of action plans to address gender-based violence, and they're also rolling over funds for compensation of employees. And then in correctional services, they are rolling funds over for goods and services, such as the procurement of uniforms, ammunition, pepper spray, etc., as well as the procurement of pistols. So these are mainly goods and services items. Agriculture, land reform and rural development is rolling money over from the first phase of the presidential employment program. And members, you will also see in this adjustments budget, additional funds were allocated for this purpose, but the money from the previous allocation has not been spent and will be rolled over. The same with sports, arts and culture. They also requested rollovers from the first phase of the presidential employment initiative. Water and sanitation is requesting a rollover for operational payments for the Vaal River pollution remediation project, and that will increase the regional bulk infrastructure grant. Next slide. So members, in the rules in terms of the environment states that an accounting officer for a department may utilize a saving in the amount appropriated under a main division within a vote towards the defrayment of excess expenditure under another main division, but it may not exceed 8% of the amount appropriated under that main division. This section does not authorize the utilization of savings on specifically and exclusively appropriated funds. It does not authorize an amount appropriated for transfers to another institution, and it also does not authorize an amount appropriated for capital expenditure in order to defray current expenditure. Next slide. So in terms of the request, and the National Treasury presented this in detail, members. So the request to Parliament is basically to approve virements or shifts from schools infrastructure backlog grant for workbooks. They're also requesting, the higher education is requesting to shift funds from vacant posts to the National Student Financial Aid. And health is actually requesting for virements from the health NHI to other grants. And also to note there is that they are asking a shift for more than 8%. So the shift amounts to 23.2%. Women, youth and persons with disability is requesting to shift funds from consultants to compensation. Justice is also requesting a virement above 8%. The police wants to shift money from the construction and upgrading of police stations to the for overtime payments. And then Department of Environmental Affairs wants to shift money from the expanded public works program to other institutions. And then the last four is also just asking to shift funds from transfers for other purposes. And then you will see small business, tourism and trade and industry also requesting Parliament to approve amounts to be shifted more, that is more than 8%. Next slide. Members, this slide shows the in-year performance of national departments post the adjustments. So the table includes national departments with expenditure less than 40% and more than 60% of the adjustments budget in the first 6 months of the 2021 financial year. The slow spending departments is military veterans at 27.7%, despite a reduction in the budget already. And the highlighted departments requested rollovers from last year, which might be the reason for the slow expenditure in the current financial year after the adjustments process. Next slide. So members, this slide only summarizes the composition of the adjustments of the top 10 votes. I will now hand over to my colleague Mapula to take you through the Division of Revenue section.
Thank you, Nelia. Good morning, honorable members. I'm going to take you through the Division of Revenue slides. Slide 15. Thank you, Siraj. So the 2021 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill provides for an increase in the expenditure of 3.6% for the current financial year, and there is no additional allocation for local government through the Division of Revenue Bill. This reflects government's attempt to further support the economy and pursue fiscal consolidation with projected revenue larger than estimated. Next slide. So additional allocations of 14.7 billion to the provincial equitable share for the wage agreement. And we also see an additional 6.47 billion allocated to the provincial equitable share for the presidential youth employment. Next slide. So in terms of the changes to the provincial and local government conditional grant, we see 81 million is added to the direct regional bulk infrastructure grant for the George local municipality. 150 million is reduced from the National Health Insurance indirect grant for the Limpopo Academic Hospital because of the delays experienced in the project. And 10 million is reduced from the Health Revitalization grant for the Western Cape for Klipfontein Hospital. This is because of the delays in the appointment of professional service providers for building design. And we see a 1.3 billion reduced from the public network grant for the city of Cape Town to align to its revised implementation plan of the My City Phase 2A project. And we see a 210 million is rollover for the school infrastructure backlog grant to complete projects that are part of the sanitation appropriation for education initiatives. These funds are for schools in the Eastern Cape, Free State, KwaZulu-Natal, and Limpopo. Next slide. 97 million of the school infrastructure backlog grant is reprioritized from the goods and services portion of the Department of Basic Education for planning and oversight of the grant. And we also see 243 million being reprioritized from the various components of the National Health Insurance indirect grant to the Human Resource and Training grant. And 582 million is rolled over in the indirect regional bulk infrastructure payment for the Vaal River pollution remediation project in Mfuleni local municipality. And we also see 90 million is shifted from the direct component of the Neighborhood Development Partnership grant to the indirect component of the grant. Next slide. In terms of the division of revenue over the Mtaf, we see that the provincial and municipal grants face multiple pressures over the medium term as government reduces spending growth and poor economic performance affect other revenue and funding sources. So over the 2022 Mtaf period, transfers to provinces and municipalities in the form of equitable share and conditional grants are estimated to grow below inflation. And over the next 3 years, government proposes the allocation of 48.4% of available non-interest expenditure to national departments, 42% to provinces, and only 9.6% to local government. Next slide. In terms of changes to the provincial and local government equitable share, we see that the provincial equitable share is the main source of revenue for provinces, and it is made up of 6 components, with education and health as the largest 2 components. So between 2022-2023 financial year and 2024-2025, changes will be phased into the health component, which accounts for 27% of the provincial equitable share. So this change follows a recent review that updated the risk-adjusted capitation index. So the last review was done in 2010. In the updated component, the standalone HIV variable will be integrated into other variables. So the 3 variables that will be added is going to be the premature mortality, a multiple deprivation index, and the sparsity. In terms of the local government equitable share, it will be updated to account for projected household growth, inflation, and estimated increase in bulk water, electricity costs over the Mtaf period. Next slide. In terms of the changes to the provincial and local government conditional grants over the Mtaf, we see changes in the HIV, TB, malaria, and community outreach grant. So from the 2022-2023 financial year, the grant will only consist of a comprehensive HIV and AIDS component, funding HIV and AIDS and TB related services. The grant will also be renamed as the District Health Program Grant. So the second one, the Comprehensive Agricultural Support Program, we see the colleges of agriculture having been shifted to the national government, as well as the funding provided through this grant. And the Early Childhood Development Grant will be moved from the Department of Social Development to the Department of Basic Education from the financial year 2022-2023. And the Provincial Road and Maintenance Grant, so in the 2021 budget, an incentive component was allocated based on provincial performance using the main formula of the conditional grant. So due to the delays in developing the objective allocation criteria, the incentive component will be removed from the grant baseline for 2022-2023. So the National Treasury will continue to work with the Department of Transport to develop objective criteria for the incentives. So in terms of local government, changes in the local government conditional grants, we see the change in municipal infrastructure grant, the expansion of the scope of the grant to help municipalities improve their asset management practices, and has been delayed. So funds will not be allocated to a new indirect component of the grant at the beginning of 2022-2023, but funds may be transferred during the year if the Department of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs does the work required to identify municipalities that needs this intervention. Next slide. So in addition to the proposed changes that we have seen, the PBO has embarked on a project in looking at the efficiency and effectiveness of expenditure on conditional grant. So we assessed the performance and the content of conditional grants of basic education, health, human settlement, agriculture, transport conditional grants as reflected in the schedules to the DORA and reported in the 2019-2020 annual report and administered by the respective departments. What the analysis showed is that performance outputs or indicators were not well defined in most of these grants. There was a mismatch between expected outputs and actual outputs. There was a duplication of indicators or outputs, and in some instances, there was inconsistent or no reporting on actual non-financial information. In some instances, there were no targets set for the outputs, which becomes problematic. Overspending on some of the grants accompanied by underperformance, or underspending that is accompanied by overperformance. So reporting on the performance was not measured against the set targets. There was also incomplete performance information. So the lack of proper performance information on conditional grants in the annual reports of the department makes it difficult for the effectiveness of expenditure and impact of outputs delivered by government. Thank you. I'll hand over to Spetalo to continue with the last slides.
Is my camera on? Morning, members, and thank you, Mapula. I'm trying to sort out my okay. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'm struggling on switching on my camera, but with your permission, I'll request to continue with my camera off.
Perfect.
If that would be okay. Yeah, thank you. In the next two slides, I'll be showing the historic trend of the National Department spending. This graph in front of us shows the expenditure by economic classification. Looking into the red column, amongst other classification, we can see that the payment for capital spending has been has been an ongoing underspending for that classification. And the public sector infrastructure update on the budget review in 2021, it shows that the public sector capital expenditure as a share of GDP has been declining since 2015. So expenditure on capital asset has been an issue for some time. And in the fiscal brief output that was released by our office earlier this month, we also highlighted the issue of underspending on capital assets. And if the government wants to address the issue of reduction in unemployment, poverty, economic growth, capital investment by public and the private sector are one crucial component that needs to be addressed urgently. Can we move to the next slide? During the adjustment budget, some departments request or they receive additional money, and some they have their budget reduced as a matter of reprioritization. So it will be useful to understand whether those departments that receive additional money or request additional money, they request it because they are overspending on their budget, or maybe because it's a matter of reprioritization, or because there are some other pressing issues that need attention or that need some allocation. So looking into this graph here, we see that there is a spiking out of the expenditure in the financial year 2019-2020 of the Social Development Department. And this was a result of an earlier payment of the April 2020 social grant in response to the COVID-19 lockdown measures. But leaving out this issue of social development, overall, we can see that generally department, they tend to underspend on their budget. As we have seen on the slide previously presented by Nelia, that amongst other departments, the presidency, the COGTA, the Agriculture and Reform and Rural Development, and Water and Sanitation are amongst the departments that requested or that have received additional money in the adjustment budget. And yet they are amongst the departments that are continuing to have underspending on their budget. So one may look at for an example, at the issue of the water and sanitation, that is continuing to have underspending, yet we have a water which is a big problem in our country, and the department continue to have underspending. We can move to the next slide. In summary of our presentation, we note that the total estimated expenditure increased from 1.83 trillion to 1.89 trillion in the 2021-2022 financial year. The adjustments to vote appropriation are offset against the provincial allocation and contingency reserves and increased by 15 billion. Adjustment also include a contingency reserves of 2.9 billion and a provisional allocation of 11 billion that have not been assigned to at the time of the tabling of the adjustment budget. An analysis of the baseline for 2021-2022 as estimated in the 2020 MTEF show that the compensation of employee increased by 3.3 to 40.7% between the 2020-2021 revised estimate. As my colleague noted in the previous slide, the Presidential Employment Initiative will only support the creation of more than 140,000 short-term jobs, but also aim to catalyze the growth and the job creation and provide the support for self-employed people. Next slide, Siraj. The provincial and municipal government face multiple pressures over the medium term because of the government reduction in the spending growth and the poor economic performance that affects other revenue and the funding sources. So changes to equitable share formulas aim to improve equal revenue division in the provincial and local government. And also the changes to conditional grant structure will also be implemented in the financial year 2022-2023. So the PPO analysis of conditional grant suggests an improvement in administration of the grant in a form of the context, processing and reporting and monitoring. Chair, this is our submission as the office. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chairperson and honored members. Thank you, colleagues. We give it back to you, Chairperson. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, FFC and PBO. Honorable members, let's get to the questions. Let me get indications of who would like to interact with the presentations. You know how we do it. Honorable members. Honorable Mtaf.
Honorable Konyana, please, Chair.
Honorable Konyana.
Kaiso.
Honorable Kaiso. Any other honorable member?
Mlenzana, Chairperson.
Honorable Mlenzana. Is that all honorable members? Okay, let's go back to us timing ourselves. I'll be generous and I'll give honorable members a maximum of 5 minutes. You don't need to use it, but that's your maximum. I stop you if you go beyond 5 minutes. I will start with Honorable Mtaf.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Chair. Honorable members, members of the media, and teams from FFC and PBO, as led by Dr. Mbava and Dr. Janchis. Chair, I just have a few comments and a few questions. Maybe let me start with the presentation from the FFC, where on slide 20, I see when they speak of debt servicing costs, the cost seems to be increasing from the current financial year to financial year 2024-2025. I just want to find out what could be the cause of that, because from a layman's point of view is that as the debt decreases, the cost should follow as well. unless if maybe we are looking at a situation where the country is only servicing the interest part of the debt and not attempting at the principal facility. So I'm just interested to find out why their projection shows an increment in terms of the debt servicing cost. And one thing that is also picked up by both FFC and PBO is on the unspent funds in the transport votes as it relates to the public transport network grant. This seems to be recurring, Chair, and my question is to find out what could be the inhibiting factors or prohibiting factors to ensure that these funds are spent, because 1.9 billion on transport is a huge amount not to be picked up and questioned. Again, with FFC, on slide 27, Ntate Ngube speaks about capacitation of councillors. It's true, and we agree with the Commission that the resources must be set aside to ensure that upskilling does happen to hung municipalities councillors, particularly for those that are formed through coalitions. But I think that we also need to also remember that we always lament on the shortage of skills in the administration as well. So I'm just interested to find out, is there any advice on from the FFC on how best we can ensure that the interventions by the National Treasury under the capacitation grant and SALGA's efforts put together in a manner that can be measured to ensure that both councillors as well as the administration are developed to reach and achieve the skills that are required in order to perform optimally. I mean, one cannot remember the report issued by SALGA, I think it was in October, that the councillors, about 62% of them do not possess basic computer skills to ensure that they are able to interact with the reports as tabled in government and in council. Chair, the other point that was picked up by both PBO and FFC relates to the contingency reserve. I wonder if whether do we have anyone in the meeting from National Treasury who can help us understand what is this intended for? I mean, if you put resources aside, but you do not assign them to particular votes, how are they accessed and how do we account on them? Because if it's a contingency reserve, there should be some sort of limitations as to how far it can be accessed and used for. On the reductions around the NHI, will I be correct to say that the NHI is no longer a government priority? Because I see it's reflected on slide 17 from PBO, 243 million is moving from NHI to human resource training grant. Is there a phasing out of NHI, or it's just that it's no longer a government priority? And I'm asking both the PBO and FFC, maybe based on their interaction with the reports, they can be able to indicate what is their view. The last one, Chair, is on past performance by national votes. There's a very telling slide, it's just that it is not numbered, which speaks about past performance by national votes. And it reflects a declining spend for capital assets. PBO will correct me, but for me, it's a worrying factor. And a worrying factor because once you create assets, the balance sheet is enhanced, the balance sheet becomes healthier. Now, if we have a trend of a declining spend on capital assets, are we saying that we are sitting with an underperforming balance sheet? That's number one. Number two, are we saying that at this point in time, the state is failing to create assets of ownership for future generations? And for me, that is worrying, Chair, because we are sitting with a situation whereby we are pushing and punting infrastructure development as one of the catalysts to economic growth.
Injury time.
Performance, you are not able to see that particular commitment to achieve that. Thank you very much, Chair. That was my last point. I really appreciate the time to participate, and thanks again for the presentations. They are really empowering. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Mtaf. Honorable Mhlonyana.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chair, we welcome the report. And I just needed I have some clarity-seeking questions. My first question also starts with the debt service cost, which seem to be increasing. I just needed clarity, or is it maybe it's increasing because we have also increased our debt, or what's the situation in that one? To Fighter AD, I'll call him Fighter AD, Chair. I'm very generous today. To Fighter AD, Fighter AD spoke about the 1.9 trillion and the 23% inflation to provinces. My question that I wanted to ask Fighter AD is, if provinces are struggling to meet their obligation as we speak on education and health, what will it mean to the nation if if we are having cuts and the provinces must cut on the education and health? And furthermore, Chair, on that one, the conditional grants that are given to provinces is decreased, and then that might affect the projects. Some projects may stop and some projects may slow down. It costs more to stop a project because there's still other things that if a project was already in motion and you stop it, you still have to pay costs like security and all those kinds of things. So is there any way not around it, Chair, to try and make sure that projects which were already in motion must be finalized as quickly as possible? And then to fight Kululi Ngube, we need to protect the poor and the vulnerable. And then what do you think must be done to protect the poor and the vulnerable, putting in mind that they are the large number of our society? If this expenditure moderation are going to touch on our poor and the vulnerable, what do you think must be done? And again, I think he needs to specify on what needs to be done and who needs to do it and how it must be done on this expenditure moderation. Because if you're not going to be specific, you know, the government of the day sometimes just run around, they don't even know what's happening or what they are doing. And then to Dr. Jantis, Dr. Economic growth that we keep on talking about, I don't see it. I don't see it going to benefit the people who need it the most. I don't see it how it will benefit the township economy. I don't see it how it's going to benefit the informal sector, which employs a lot of people, by the way. So maybe I am missing something, or you can school me on what it needs to be done. You know, how is this economic growth going to be directed into the informal sector and into the township economy? And lastly, Chairperson, I just want to touch up on this issue of 440,000 short-term jobs that they keep on talking about. First and foremost, I want to understand, Chair, these 440,000 jobs that the president is the presidential initiative. Which sector are we talking about, first and foremost? But secondly, why are they short-term? Why can they not be permanent jobs? Permanent jobs that give security to our people? Why can it not be permanent jobs that give financial stability to our people? Why must it continue to be, we continue to be told about short-term, short-term, and even that short-term, no one specifies it to us how short is short. Maybe it's 3 months. What you gonna do with 3 months when you've been hungry for years? Maybe it's 6 months. But why can we not make it permanent jobs that want to benefit our people fully? Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Honorable Mhlonyana, thank you. Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you for receiving these presentations from both the PBO and Fiscal Commission. There's a number of areas that I wanted to talk about. but I'll see time where does it put me. Firstly, on the presentation by FFC, there's a talk on the MTBPS that you say measures to exercise control should not come at an expense of services for the poor, or providing services for the poor, or catering for the poor. And at the same time, you're saying looking or in the long run, you foresee a situation whereby during the MTF, the poor would not be protected, especially when it comes to conditional grants. Now, I'm not sure what are you actually saying on these two statements. I wanted us to get a very clear message. What are you actually saying here on the statement on the MTBPS and you're focused on the MTF? What are you actually saying there? Because it's like you wanted to say to tell us something as a committee, but you stop short of now finishing it. Now, let me come to the issue on the non-expenditure or underspending by department. Some you say they're serial non-expenditure or poor expenditure departments. You mentioned there the particular department, you said agriculture, water, and sanitation. I think it's not good, Chairperson, that we, having such serious challenges of water in the country. You go to your CD Bay, you go to your Bloom Water, there's, and even other number of places in the country where a problem of water and sanitation. And we should be having this serious underspending. I don't know how many times have we tried to engage the department. Perhaps as a committee, we have to go back and really engage very seriously with the departments, more especially where an extra, money was allocated on request by these departments, but yet the outcome are so poor. Each time when we interact, there hasn't been much, progress around the same additional funding which was done, and given the, the outlook that was portrayed over the past month with the local government elections, it should be sending us, a very clear message that how we should fast track all the process from all fronts. So now my other question it was on the military veterans, but we shouldn't be having the situation which has just occurred recently, whilst we have in the department underspending, so having such an underspending. We definitely have to, there must be a way to address that situation, especially of the military veterans. On health revitalization grants, we're having this reduction. Obviously, I want to agree with my colleague, Honorable Mtaf, that it does seem that now NHI is no longer a priority, given the situation of some of the dilapidated infrastructure of the health institutions. I would mention, for instance, a regional hospital in the Eastern Free State, Putadichaba or Kwakwa, Mufumadi Manabo Hospital. It's an old institution which needs to be revitalized, and you look forward now to do that or to improve that, but with the reduction of on the health revitalization grant,
injury time.
It's not possible for that to can happen. So I'm just concluding, Chairperson. Well, I think yes, I want to agree because it's going to cause a serious problem moving forward with this, given the situation that it has portrayed. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kaiso. Honorable Mlenzana.
Thank you, Chairperson. You know, the reason that I'm smiling as you are saying injury time to Comrade Kaiso is that today it looks like we have got much chunk to chew in front of us, and there's no time. As a result, I've also tried to prioritize my questions, and some are consolidated. Like, for instance, let me start, of course, by welcoming the presentations. Hence, this host of questions, Chairperson. These two presentations have been thought-provoking. Chairperson, I'm now starting from the bottom. On division of revenue, look, Chairperson, I've also decided to club now my questions for both FFC and the Parliamentary Budget Office. They will share the questions, and if they could both respond. On division of revenue, I've clubbed it with conditional grants deliberately. One, are conditional grants still conditional? Looking at the presentation, the under expenditure, the perpetual under expenditure, let me put it like that, non-reporting, tendencies and all. I'm trying to be brief, Chairperson. But all that revolves around your conditional grants. Also on division of revenue, particularly the Parliamentary Budget Office, consistently trying to arouse or jog our memories regarding the baselines. At what stage should we try to move a little from the baseline approach to budgeting as per the need? I don't want to call it zero-based budgeting deliberately. I'm saying budgeting according to need, or budgeting as per the need. Let me jump, Chairperson. Now, Chair, on the compensation of employees or the wage bill, here, Chair, I'm introducing a question deliberately. Is there anywhere where government still does what it used to do, where the number of employees would be informed by the task or job allocation and performance per employee, such that then we would be able to say, yes, we do have to cut on the number of employees so as to manage the wage bill, or we do want a lean structure, but which is effective per entity and per department. And lastly, relating to that, since when have we ever relooked and reassessed the employees, particularly when it comes to ghost employees? Some employees are called ghost employees because a particular welcome Mlenzana, who is father to Uzola, dies, but would remain within the employ, but budgeted for, but not paid because she is dead. Hence, now you would see that under expenditure when it comes to the wage bill. How is that being managed? Lastly, I think I'm trying, Chairperson. This one is the last one. On management of expenditure at local government in particular. We have been talking about this, Chair. And what we have been saying is that punishing a particular institution which doesn't spend by taking back the money to the treasurer's kitty is not, by the way, punishing the entity or the government institution, but you are rather punishing the end user, the electorate, the voter, the community member. Can we be advised on how best to deal with this in the line of realizing the district development model? Where do we locate this? Who is who into this? Where is Treasury? What role should Treasury be playing? Is it not time that perhaps Treasury is allocated per district to monitor the expenditure such that we don't have this nice song about under expenditure? Chairperson, I will come back if you give me time. Otherwise, yeah, let me stop there for now.
Thank you, Honorable Mlenzana. I get your the message loud and clear. But what I've realized is that in other presentations, we end up asking questions and not giving enough time to the presenters to respond. But yourself and Honorable Kaiso, you were lucky because I also allocated you the 2 minutes from Honorable Hlonyana that she didn't use. But as you said,
thanks, Chairperson. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
You must also thank Honorable Hlonyana.
Thanks. Fighter.
Okay, honorable members. Let's have a second round of questions, and again, I'll be generous. I'll give you 5 minutes maximum, and please make sure that you don't have anything remaining. You finish everything within that 5 minutes. I'll start with Honorable Mtaf. We've got questions that you want to raise.
Thank you very much, Chair. No, I will only have 1.5 questions. One is the reduction due to project delays, particularly as it relates to the 10 million for Klipfontein Hospital. The reason that is finished there is that there's a delay in the appointment of a professional service provider. I'm not sure if whether from the presentation by National Treasury, PBO and FFC have picked up what is the current situation as far as this is concerned. Is there an effort to appoint? And also, what is the impact on this particular issue as it relates to the provision of health services in the Western Cape? And I'm saying, Chair, that it was a 1.5 question because there is also a reduction on the delay of completion of Limpopo Academic Hospital. Now, in Gauteng, when I'm in Gauteng, I will see vehicles written Limpopo Health Department transporting patients from Limpopo to George Mokari in Garankuwa, in Tshwane. So I'm not sure if whether that delay, is it something that is being given attention and there's a priority to ensure that that particular project is completed timeously? And what does it mean when these funds are moved? Is there no intention of completing the project? And what costing has then been made to ensure that whatever that is moved does not impact on the project? The last one, Chair, is just on the the school infrastructure backlog grant, where 210 million was allocated. However, 97 million of that has been reprioritized, meaning that the balance is now 113 million. Why the 210 million? Why is it also prudent to lose 97 million? Did we experience any savings in the programs, or is the money of 113 million enough and sufficient to ensure that these projects are completed in time? The worrying factor there, Chair, is that these schools are located in the Free State, the Eastern Cape, and Limpopo. And we know that those are the provinces with the highest need as far as infrastructure for schools are concerned, particularly on sanitation. Thank you, Chair. Those are my inputs for the second round. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Mtaf, so that I don't forget this one. Support staff, there are issues which I think they mainly relate to underspending or transfer of funds, but mainly underspending. Can you please note those departments, because we must write to them as this committee, and they must give us full explanation as to what is happening around that, so that we don't just end up by raising those issues. And yeah, I think we'll see how we craft those letters and we write directly to them. For instance, Department of Health, they must tell us this academic hospital in Limpopo has been there for forever, but why is it not being finished? And they must give us some time as to when exactly are they finishing it. And but similar things which have been raised, I think we should start interacting directly with some of these departments and not through a national treasury. I think that helps, Honorable Mtaf. Honorable Shanyana, please come in.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Chairperson, I have one question and a comment. My first question, Chair, I want to understand, maybe we can be taken into confidence. The structural adjustments that have been imposed in this country, is there an institution that we are owing that is imposing the structural adjustment to the Republic of South Africa, or it's just the ANC government thinking that we should have structural adjustment? You know, I've been thinking about this, Chair, and it's been eating me for days, and I can no longer hold myself. I need that question to be answered. Is there a specific institution? And if there is, can it be named, so that we're all in the same level? But secondly, Chair, my comment will be, it is amazing how we always reduce spending where it affects the poor, right? But like health and education, but we don't want to reduce spending on those blue lights of those ministers. We are not cutting the bloated cabinet. We are not cutting the exorbitant salaries which are earned by the ministers. We are not cutting those useless sham deputy ministers, which must just go. There is no need for deputy ministers in this country. So I really wish that when this cutting happens, Chair, it should be directed there where we're just spending money for no reason whatsoever. But we're continuing to cut, and we now begin to see that this cutting is affecting the most important sectors in our communities, which is health and education. And unfortunately, our health department is limping as it is. I don't know if you cut, it means you just want it to collapse if we are going to continue cutting. And the education, you still have schools which are still mud houses and kids which are still studying outside. What are you cutting there? So, Chair, that needs to be relooked properly when these comrades do this budget. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Shanyana. Honorable Kaiso.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Please come in.
I hope I am not going to be longer than what you said. I should confine myself. So, Chair, I still want to go back to these departments which are said to be underspending, and during the prior adjustment of the budget, they did receive money. But then, if you look at the reports that we're receiving now, it does say that we have also to go back to the same departments. Because the presentation on Fiscal Commission does reflect on the issue of performance, output, and indicators which were not well, for instance, defined, mismatch, duplication, inconsistent reporting or no reporting, targets which were missed and not some, overspending on some of the grants, reporting on performance was not measured against the targets, and so now human settlement, agriculture, transport, and what else? So basic education. I think these are the departments that we dealt with previously. But now I'm saying, what advice is that the commission is actually giving us on this? What is their view, or what is their advice should happen in as far as they are concerned, as an advice from the Fiscal Commission? Because I think we've met with the department previously, and it should be one of the tasks or departments that also we should pick up when we moving forward to discussion on the adjustment appropriation bill and the division of revenue bill. Yeah, thank you very much, Chair.
Yabona nginika isikhathi esiningi besekhona isikhathi Honorable Qaiso. Honorable Lenzana.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Perhaps, do you know the reason why is that we try to consolidate? Like now, I have one generic question. I won't be tempted to get into a political debate raised by Honorable Hlonyane. I'm trying to control myself. Perhaps, Fighter, we need an extra parliamentary engagement where we deal with some of these issues. But then, Chairperson, Dr. Judges would understand that I would always ask this question, particularly when we are in the middle of the term. Let me start this question from the bottom. Is SONA, as presented by the President, 2019, still our canvas? Perhaps asking the same question, Chairperson, but not only to FFC, but also to the Parliamentary Budget Office. Can they talk to the physical consolidation of the President's injunctions, particularly in relation to economic renewal and transformation? How does this budget arrangement take us towards that? How does it take us towards building of a developmental state? How does it take us towards the advancement of social transformation? How does it take us towards realization of class biasness, the what is now called pro-poor? Isn't this notion of a pro-poor budget now a rhetoric, where we are talking pro-poor, but in terms of implementation, we're talking the other way around? Are we not marching left, but implementation right? Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Lenzana. It's my turn. Thank you to both PBO and FFC for presentations. My first question would be, I would like to hear a comment. I'm saying that there's so much emphasis on the impact on the impact of the cuts, right? But the very same departments were seeing cuts in, right? They can't spend what they have been allocated. I think the all members before me have touched on that, right? So you'll see that on the 2021 Appropriations Adjustment Bill, a lot of underspending. Last week we had the second quarter expenditure reports. Again, we had a lot of underspending, right? And shifting of funds because of There are obvious implications for that as far as service delivery is concerned. But do you think we're making a big enough emphasis on the lack of expenditure? And what do you understand the reasons to be, not the excuses that I sometimes see? What are the reasons for this under expenditure? And I also heard colleagues talking about some of the wider negative multiplying impacts of that and what should be done. On local government, economic stimulation, that is very important for own revenue. What do you think that local government should do differently to make sure that they also enhance that capacity? There are a lot of pro-poor in our expenditures. We even always, let's say, about 50% of our expenditure is spent on education, is spent on health and community services, right? That's about 50% of the budget. But with that, why do you think that we're not making a dent in terms of inequality and poverty? Because those indicators continue to deteriorate. FFC, you say we need to review the structure of conditional grants, but you fell short. You fell short of saying what do you have in mind? What do you think should be done? Yeah, there is national there is national apologies. There is national treasurer on the platform. Please come in where you think you can assist us. For instance, there was a question of 2.9 billion contingency reserve at this time of the year, and they were saying that is the first time we see that. Why is that happening? The next question goes to both of you. The grants, the conditional grants to provinces and local government. What do you think? How easy is it for them to access those grants? Do we perhaps know between PBO and FFC what informs zero adjustment to local government in the DORA? And I think last ultimately I'll then be asking which grants have perennially not performed, and do you understand the reason of their underperformance and their impact ultimately? When I don't say I'm asking to either, it means it's for both of you. You may take that question. Why are departments getting additional fund allocations when they've underspent? I think those would be my questions. And let me start with the FFC. Please, FFC, take your questions, and then after that, we'll allow PBO to take the questions, and then I'll allow National Treasurer, if they're still in the platform, to take the questions that they think they can help the meeting with. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chairperson and the members. I would like to give an opportunity to the commissioners who are capable of answering some of the questions which have been posed, as well as a research team. I have Commissioner Sachs, Commissioner Rockman. If Commissioner Mokadi is on the platform, he can also please answer some of the questions. And then the head of the research team and the research team members, if appropriate. Thank you so much, FFC team.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Chairperson of the committee, and honorable members. I wanted to respond to the very important question
about why is debt service costs continuing to grow so rapidly over the MTF. And remember, debt service costs have been the fastest growing item of expenditure, far outpacing any other item of expenditure for at least 10 years. And this growth continues. And I think, as Honorable Sonyana put it, the way to understand this is that debt is not falling. The fiscal consolidation measures that Treasury has put in place, or that has been proposed by Treasury to you, do not reduce debt. Do not even attempt to reduce debt. And we can think about the total amount of debt in two ways. Either you can think about it in terms of the rand amount that is owed, whatever that is, 3 trillion, I'm not sure how much it is. That is definitely rising and is unlikely to ever fall. Because the way government operates, it generally doesn't pay back its debt. If you issue a bond for 10 years, at the end of that 10 years, you simply have to borrow the money again. The only thing as a government that can save you from that debt is the growth of GDP, which, so if you divide the one by the other, the amount of debt that you owe divided by the amount of income you generate as an economy, which is GDP, you then get the debt to GDP ratio. If you were a household, a similar ratio would be how much do you owe divided by what is your monthly income or your annual income as a household. And you can imagine if your income is remaining fixed, but the amount that you owe is increasing and increasing, that ratio is going to increase. So the point is that this MTBPS implies very substantial fiscal consolidation, especially on the expenditure side, very low growth of expenditure. But it does not achieve, nor does it attempt to achieve, a reduction in debt. Debt continues to rise, both in nominal terms and as a share of GDP. What it attempts to do, and what it claims that it can achieve, is to stabilize that increase in debt. So at some point, Treasury believes perhaps in 2024 or 2025, the debt will stop increasing. It will not fall, it will not reduce. There's no proposal on the table to reduce debt. It's simply a proposal to stop the increase of debt. And so let me now come to, I've spoken about the debt, but the question is about the debt service costs, which are actually more important than the debt, because the debt service costs are determined by two things. First, it's the amount of debt, the amount that you borrow. Obviously, each additional amount that you borrow is going to add to your debt service costs, but it's also the interest rate that you pay on your debt. So as fiscal crisis intensifies, what happens is that the interest you pay on the debt increases because people are beginning to lose their confidence that this government will ever pay back its debt. And so when they lose that confidence, the people who are lending you money will demand a higher interest rate. So in the fiscal framework, the assumption is that the interest rate will fall a little bit, but it still remains very high and debt continues to increase. Now, I wanted to, having explained that, then answer the question posed by Honorable Mlenzana about is the budget pro-poor and does it continue to be pro-poor? Because this dynamic of increasing debt and increasing debt service costs is the dynamic that is undermining the pro-poor character of the budget, because there's an arithmetic at play, a simple arithmetic at play here that nobody can escape from. And that is that borrowing is total revenue minus debt service costs minus other spending on the goods and services and conditional grants and salaries and provincial equitable share. So if debt
excuse me, sorry, Chairperson. Sorry, Chairperson. Can you go a little slower so that we can take notes when you are defining this? Just go a little slower, please.
Okay. So maybe the arithmetic is the thing, because it's obviously, I'll be better with a blackboard at this stage, I suppose. But if you take the total revenue that government collects, revenue, and then you subtract from it the interest payments, and then you subtract again the non-interest expenditure. So it's the total revenue minus the interest payments minus the non-interest expenditure. The result is going to give you how much you borrow. So if we want to hold borrowing constant, if we want to stabilize the increase of debt or somehow reduce the debt at some future point, the arithmetic implies you have to either raise taxes or reduce spending on the poor. That's the choice we face. And what is this interest payment? Let's think about what is it when we talk about interest, what is it? It is very similar to a social grant, strangely, the interest payment on the debt. Because in a social grant, all you're doing as government, you're not providing any service or employing any people or doing anything like that. All you're doing is taking cash out of the bank account of taxpayers and putting that cash into the bank account of poor people. That's what a social grant does, effectively. With an interest payment on debt, all you are doing is taking cash out of the bank account of taxpayers and putting it into the bank account of the people you owe money to. And who are these people that you owe money to? Foreigners, foreign residents, and domestic bondholders who are the most affluent, the richest South Africans. So as debt service costs rise, the amount of the budget that you allocate to the poor, which is non-interest expenditure, is crowded out by the amount of expenditure that you allocate to the affluent, to the wealthy, in the form of interest payments. So the pro-poor character of the budget is being undermined by the rise in these debt service costs. And this is very important because you will see many people talking about how South Africa's debt is not as high as other people, as other countries. It's true, but that's not really the point. That's missing the point. The point is that South Africa's debt service costs, the amount it pays for that debt, is about 5% of national income. So all of the effort that South Africa generates its national income, produces goods and services, 5% of that is then reallocated to the wealthy. In Japan, which has a huge mountain of debt, 250% of GDP, they don't pay any interest on that debt, whereas we pay 10%, so which takes us into a separate set of debates. But I just wanted to clarify the main point being that the fiscal framework does not stabilize or does not reduce the debt. It hopes to, it's very hopeful that it will stabilize the increase in debt. Many people think that it won't succeed in doing so. So the issue we are talking about here is not reducing debt, it's stabilizing the increase. And while that increase carries on, and while interest rates on that debt remain extremely high, the budget will become less and less pro-poor in its composition. Thanks.
Thanks, Commissioner Sachs. continue, FFC, I just allowed this engagement to continue because Honorable Lenzana did ask for further clarifications. But can I allow that the responses, can we pick up our feet? And I don't want to give the respondents time, but just be aware that we still have got other things in our agenda.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Can I ask the Head of Research to also answer the questions, please?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Honourable Chair members. Quite a few questions, but I think one response that I could potentially capture most of it is an answer to a question by Honourable Kaiso, and what it's essentially, what do we mean? Essentially, when we say we need to protect the poor, but also cutting the budgets, what's the implication there? Ultimately, from our analysis and research, and I think it is by those points, it should be quite evident by now, because we have more than roughly about more than 10 years of data, is that I think if we as governments in South Africa have the money to waste, to be corrupt and underspend, overspend, we also have the money to reprioritize, to make better use and value out of them. And that is the points, I think, and within the divisional revenue as well as the appropriation, that really some money probably shouldn't even be there for those purposes, and that reprioritization is required. I won't go further about the cost of debt. I think our Deputy Chair has put it quite well. Except one thing, I think, Honourable Chair members, sometimes you might hear or you have heard people say that there will always be money to borrow. People will always be willing to lend us money. The problem here, and is as our Deputy Chair has put it, is but at what cost? These investors, they will always, and we also saw it in the average yield on the bonds from last year, around 2020, when the credit rating downgraded us. The bonds actually holders switch hands, right? And yeah, the total debt amount hasn't moved yet. However, the rate hiked the moment that change of hands happened, right? And that's easy to understand because there's something that people don't want. They throw it onto the market. The investors pick it up. They're not going to lend us at the same rates or costs that the previous owner bondholder was lending us. They're going to ask for more. And especially they're going to cite things like we have no control of our fiscus, there is fiscal risk, there is the lack of credibility of our framework, and so forth. And that is how cost of borrowing can really get so high that South Africa cannot get out under it, the burden. And it's an ongoing burden. And we certainly don't want South Africa to be owned by lenders at the end of the day. Chair, maybe let me hand over to the team to answer, especially on the provincial and local government issues in their respective field of expertise. Thank you, Chair. Let me give it to Eddie first. Thank you. Fighter Eddie.
Thanks, Chair. I'll probably respond to two questions. The one is about the 1.9 trillion. I think the point we're making there was that the total allocation to province for the 2022 MTF is 9.9 trillion and is projected to increase by 3%. But when you factor in, and that is a nominal increase, but when you factor in inflation, which is currently moving around 5%, so that essentially gives you about a 2% reduction in growth. So in real terms, the allocations are growing by -2% if you factor inflation. Just to give it in a simpler way. but overall, you still see a positive growth in the allocation. And the implications, of course, thereof, because the cost of providing services is rising faster than the allocation itself. Essentially, what is going to happen is the provinces will start moving money away from those key essential services, which is the point which we've been making throughout the submission, that because that is almost inevitable. So it is important that provinces report to the respective provincial legislatures on how they intend to manage those reductions, so that but when the allocations recover at some point in time, then the resources can be reprioritized towards those services which may have received the largest, or which may have encountered the largest impact. And then with respect to the conditional grants, well, the point we're just making there is that with this low growth, again, which is also inevitable, the result is that we're going to have this whole issue around delays in completion of projects, and the case has been made with respect to the Limpopo academic hospitals. Because of the nature of the way in which the resources are allocated, you find that we are trying to do very too much with little. So we're allocating, we're spreading the resources too thin, and as a result, there's little resources allocated to critical, to important infrastructure projects, and that is also a function of planning and prioritization within provinces. So because we're trying to do too many things with little resources, that's why it takes time for some of these projects to complete. But essentially, the result is that before some of these projects are even completed, we may find ourselves having need money for remedial, or even for maintenance, because it has taken quite a long time to complete the project. Now, there's an interesting question that was raised about whether conditional grants are still conditional grants. So the Commission is currently doing some work around the conditional grants, which in fact, the aim is to really look at some of the conditions attached to these conditional grants, and look whether they're still benefiting the system as they were originally designed. And the result of of that work will be presented to Parliament in the next year, March. I think that should be it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me respond to a few local government questions. There was one question on the capacitation of councillors as well as administration. I think, as our presentation points out, we fully agree that there is a need really to put resources and capacitate councillors, especially during this transitional period. But in addition to that, as the question says, what other measures could be pursued to make these interventions effective? We are saying, in terms of capacitation of these councillors, there's also a need to capacitate the administration so that the transition is smooth. To capacitate those councillors who will be playing a part in oversight bodies, these committees, audit and impact committees, there's need to do that. But more important, to make the process more optimal, and we know that there will be an avalanche of interventions from many stakeholders. So there's a need for a well-coordinated process, a process which minimizes overlaps, which may actually be efficient. So there is need for a well-coordinated process in terms of interventions. There was another question from Honorable Hlonyana and also the chair about what must be done to protect the poor. And as our presentation alludes to the fact that over the MTF, we see that the protection of the poor will be really declining. We make this particular assertion by looking at the local government equitable share, for example, or the overall allocations to the local government sector, that on average, the allocations are set to decline by minus 0.1% on average in real terms. And looking at the LES, we are saying it is set to decline by minus 0.4%. So what does that mean? It means over the MTF period, because the LES goes to the poor to protect the poor from all these hardships. But if it is declining, it means that protection is at risk. So that is our point there, that in fact, the poor we need to protect the poor, and the only instrument which can do so effectively is the local government equitable share, which is about water, sanitation, refuse removal, and energy, electricity. Then the question further says, what other alternatives could be done to protect the poor? I just want to mention one kind of measure, which I think the chair also alluded to, is it is important to grow local economies. Growing local economies can create jobs, and that's one sustainable way of protecting the poor. And we know when we say growing the economy of municipalities, there are low-hanging fruits there. And some of these low-hanging fruits is simply moving away from the traditional way of doing things, attract investments in municipalities, individual municipalities, attracting investments whereby they will change some of their regulations so that it's easy to invest in local spaces, to encourage or to stimulate local economic development, reduce red tape, for example, reduce timeframes for really approving licenses and so forth, so that SMEs can really thrive in that particular sector. So it's important to reflect, for municipalities themselves to reflect. We have seen some companies, big companies, moving away from some municipalities because service delivery is poor. So those are the things which municipalities must improve on. Then the other issue raised was the issue of reallocating unspent funds from certain municipalities. FFC is on record in saying that this must be done as a last resort. There are first resort items which must be actually tackled first. For example, if there is underspending, there is need to first get to the bottom of that. What are the reasons? If it is the challenge of capacity, deal with that capacity, improve that capacity, and also the capacity of oversight bodies which must monitor such spending. There's also need for consequence management. It could be a dereliction of duty by officials to underspend. So there's need to focus on this first before resorting to reallocation of resources. Then the last point which the chair mentioned, which I think Treasury will also be able to assist, is what informs zero growth of the local government allocations. So it's a very, very important question that we see that the local government is also now beginning to carry a disproportionate burden of the fiscal consolidation process, which is actually affecting poor households, especially on the local government equitable share. And also sometimes there's the assumption in government that the local government also raises its own revenue. So then such things can be done to the local, or reductions can be made to that particular sector. But the Commission is very much concerned about, as we saw in our tables, about the poor growth in the allocations to the local government, as it will actually affect the recovery process from the COVID pandemic, as well as it will directly affect the poor going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lily. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to hand over to Ms. Sasha Peters just for answering some of the appropriation questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Chen. Just perhaps two responses. Honorable Mtaf asked what's driving the underspending in the public transport network grant, and just to indicate that poor performance in this grant has been consistently.
Sasha?
The grant was reduced by 1.3 billion because.
Sasha, sorry to interrupt you. You are cut. Please just raise your face a little bit. We want to see the whole of you. There you go. There you go.
Sorry, Chairperson. So poor performance in this grant has been consistently raised. Last year, it was reduced by 1.3 billion because only 6 of the 13 cities receiving the grant had successfully launched their public transport systems. This time, it's due to delays in implementing the MyCity Phase 2A extension project in the city of Cape Town. So clearly, there's a need to see what really is hampering rolling out of this these infrastructure projects because it results in very inefficient use of those funds. Then Honorable Hlonyana wanted to know where the money for the Presidential Employment Initiative is going, and just to indicate that of that 11 billion, the 3 largest allocations are to the National Treasury to direct the funding through the City Public Employment Program window, that's 841 million. To trade, industry and competition, to the IDC to support economic activities in communities, and then also to the Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Department for the livelihoods program that they are spearheading. Thank you, Chair. Chair now, and I don't know if you have further inputs.
Thank you, Sasha. Back to you, Chair, and thank you, Honourable Chair members, for the questions.
Okay.
Those are the inputs, Chairperson. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Doctor, and your team. Dr. Janchis, please come in.
Thank you so much, Chairperson. Thank you for the questions and guidance from the members as well. I think, I don't know if my video, I know my network is okay. Thank you. I think there are quite a lot of questions. I'll quickly rush through some of them, and I'll ask Dr. Olandi, Dr. Mohammed, and the rest of the team to also come in quite quickly there. I think the one point I want to start with is around the point around economic growth. And I think what we have emphasized, Chair, is that the employment and economic growth are really macroeconomic questions or issues that has to be addressed through macroeconomic issues in a way. And then our emphasis in the last discussion on Friday with Treasury colleagues as well was around really how fiscal policies really has to be used in a way that supports how central it is in industrial policy, where fiscal policies use support productive sectors, your manufacturing, your agriculture, your sectors that will really ensure economic development and growth comes in as a very strong factor. That's the point that we're trying to emphasize, that on growth in terms of answering the question what needs to be done in that regard. And I think what I said on Friday was that the Minister of Finance was part of the discussion earlier in the month, where he acknowledged the importance around the need to really transform our structural economy to be more supportive of productive sectors as opposed to how we are currently spending a lot of time around financialization of our economy. And that's how I'll pack there. I know it's a very broad, abstract answer, but I think that's, given time, it's easier to maybe pack it there. Another main point, Chair and members, is around skills and so on. I think in our presentation last week, we have shown that actually government reports have indicated that government has not realized its target in terms of getting skilled managers in the public sector, particularly for both all the spheres of government. And it's a very worrying fact, because when you look at some underspending, certainly you realize that the lack of skill or lack of capacity in spending some of these budgets allocated is really a good idea, because if you have inequality and so much poverty and you have underspending, you've got debt as well, it doesn't really bode well in that regard. So the big issue, as reported by the government as well, is around capacity to spend. It's a big issue. Looking at how much government has spotted as lack of capacity by government, senior managers, and also the factors. And one point that for me struck me was that when you look at local government level, about 70% or 80% of municipalities that hire consultants is precisely because of the lack of capacity, lack of skills, and lack of capacity to implement hence so much consultants being appointed in many of these municipalities, and which creates a problem because many instances, some of the consultants really doesn't help municipalities in dealing with issues of service delivery and so on. And particularly, Chair, when we look at about skills and capacity, there's strategic areas. Look at CFOs, look at technical division, look at municipal engineering, and other very strategic areas are more important in terms of ensuring that we've got skilled members in that regard, and which will also go down to the rest of the personnel in the entity in that regard. Another point I want to talk about is around the question on zero-based budget, which Honorable Lenza somehow touched on it indirectly. But I think what we have said in June last year, June or July, in our brief, we've shown to the committee that actually only about 15% of the current consolidated expenditure budget framework, it's not based on zero-based budgeting principles. About 80% of the consolidated expenditure budget frame structure actually is based on the principle of zero-based budgeting. And certainly the issues around efficiencies, and I think National Treasury, we mentioned that National Treasury has done a lot of work around looking at efficiencies, and we will really encourage committee to invite them to give them some ideas. So the issue of efficiency and so other effects comes into place. But I think the concerns, the thinking around zero-based is a very important aspect, but already 85% of the budget is based on, when you look at the transfers, you require business plans, which is based on starting spending from zero. You look at current capital expenditure, and so many other expenditure are really based on the zero-based principle. So in a way, it could provide some support, but it's not going to make a major issues. But also looking at the issue of capacity, which is a very important element that comes into play there. The issue around pro-poor, I want to come into the issue around pro-poor as well. What I said, Chair and members, in the opening remarks there, I certainly deliberately removed spending on education and health and other social expenditure from the social spending, because look at international experiences, all governments spend on education, all governments spend on health, all governments, but when you narrow it down to social spending, we actually, and the studies actually, before I get to the point I want to make, our studies even within the country, even government studies, have actually shown that the social spending far much outweigh many measures to deal with immediately with poverty and some of the socio-economic challenges better, quickly than many other interventions that are made over the short term. And then the point I want to make there, which I made at the beginning of the introductory remarks, was really around, say, look, when you look at how much we spend on social spending here, if it transfers, allocation, cash, as Deputy Chairperson Sachs has mentioned, give example about the social spending, we actually spend far less. We spend 6%, less than 7% of our GDP on social spending. Yet we have higher inequality. But when we look at our country, so actually we have lower inequality or Gini coefficients do spend quite significant. I mean, in average, the lowest is 12%, above 12% spending on social spending in trying to deal with. So answering the question of why are we spending so much, but we're not getting better outcomes that we hope for, we're not spending much in the areas that will realize lower inequality and reduce poverty. That's a point I want to raise. But I think this is a question that requires more substantive discussion around this. But that's a very important point I wanted to highlight. Chairperson, I think I'll stop there and just give just a last point to emphasize around the skills. The 2019-2024 MTSF emphasized the importance of capable and ethical state to realize some of our objectives. And I think that area has not been done within the public sector as a whole to ensure that we've got a very capable and capacitated public sector in this regard. Thank you so much, Chair. I'll give Dr. Landi, Dr. Mohammed, and the rest of the team to come in. Thank you so much. I'll come in if there's need arises. Thank you. Colleagues, Dr. Mohammed, Dr. Elia.
Okay. Thank you, Dumisani. Members, I think there was a lot of questions around the conditional grant expenditure. And as Honorable Buthelezi also recommend that you must actually get those departments in that administer those grants. Our analysis that we did really focused on the technical side, but also on the performance, because when we started our analysis, we also realized that there's not a lot of information available to us to do a proper analysis of the progress within the grants. We started off with the schedules to the Division of Revenue, but that didn't provide us. There was a 2-year lag if you want to determine progress on the implementation. But we got the information, the data from the Division of Revenue at schedules. And then we realized some of the indicators are not really, really smart. And when we started to do further analysis, we looked at the annual reports, and we realized that there's not good reporting on all these grants, and not all the provinces even report in the same manner. There was a lot of duplication. So I really think the FFC also indicated that they really need to look at the structure of the grants. And we were also part of another discussion in terms of the education grants. And from that discussion, we also realized that there's a huge need to look at the structure of the grants and whether all the grants are still funding the priorities of government. So I think there's a bigger discussion that needs to happen around the conditional grants. Sasha answered the question on the transport grant. And just in terms of the NHI shifting members, the indirect portion of the NHI grant has for years now been underspent. So this year they want to shift it basically to fund one of our other grants. So it's basically shifting the purpose of that grant. And then there's also a lot of discussions in terms of the underspending. I just also want to emphasize, members, you don't have to approve the rollovers. So the money bills allow you not to approve the rollovers. So especially in those departments that are now underspending by underspending in the first 6 months of the financial year, you can really call in the departments that are slow in spending and determine whether you should actually approve those rollovers. Then there was a question about the short-term jobs. I totally agree with you, Honourable Member, that the short-term jobs actually created a lot of issues in terms of whether those funds are then part of the baseline of departments and what will the carry-through effect be. So you appoint people and you just let them go. In the previous round, in phase 1, it was mainly EPWP jobs. So those are really short-term jobs. Currently, you can see it's more longer-term jobs. I also did an exercise to determine the unit cost per allocation to departments, and it's the unit cost from last year to this year. There was such a huge variation, so it's totally different jobs that they actually want to create or support or other funds this year than last year. Just one example, in health last year, if you calculated unit cost, it was 32,000 Rand. This year, if you calculate a unit cost, it's 142,000 Rand. There's no correlation between the first phase and the second phase. That's basically what I want to say. And also, again, some of the funds from the first phase were rolled over, and those were EPWP jobs that they created, and they got additional funds for additional EPWP jobs. And our members also noted that there's slow spending on the real EPWP conditional grant. So members, it's also up to you whether you're going to approve these additional funding to departments. Then, obviously, there was a lot of questions in terms of the COE. In the analysis on slide 6, what we tried to show in that analysis is that departments don't really, it seems that departments don't really base their estimates on COE on the organizational structures. We showed there that in the 1 year, the department increased from 2020, the real expenditure or estimated real expenditure, they increased the budget for the next financial year with 40%. So what was that based on? One of the other departments increased it by 14.6 and 22.8%. So what was that based on? Definitely not on organizational structure. I don't think government has got a handle on COE members because also not all departments are on PERSAL. So I think there was a lot of previously research done by DPSA or the Treasury, but I don't know the results of those research that has been done on whether we really do have a handle on COE. But also departments, the Treasury has got tools that they provide departments, like special workbooks to calculate the COE, but I'm not sure whether those tools are actually used. Then there was also another spending it also relates to the underspending and the shifting of funds. I don't know why departments can't spend, especially members. There must be a good reason. Either it's planning, either it's in terms of the tendering or the procurement processes, but we really need to get to the root cause of this underspending. Lately, the Treasury actually, or national departments, try to incentivize municipalities or provincial departments if they spend. So if you show that you can spend, you get more money. So if you show you can't spend, we take away the money and we actually allocate it to a department that, or a local government that can't spend. Is that the right way to do it, or do we fix the real problem? Then there was a question on the capacity and skills, specifically in municipalities. In last week's discussion, or in our discussions, we always mention that we need to look at more efficiency, specifically in the macro structure. And one of the answers from the National Treasury was, but what do we do with all those CFOs if we consolidate departments or bring smaller entities into departments as a program? It will actually be great to have all those CFOs available for municipalities. Perhaps we should think about it in that way. I think I'm done. I think my colleague Siraj or Mapula might also have something to say. Thank you, members.
Siraj?
Okay. Thank you, Honourable Chair. I just want to make a quick point. There were questions about underspending and efficiency of spending, and I'll make a quick point about that, and then another point about growth and interest rates. I think we've been stressing from our side in over many presentations now the impact of poverty, unemployment, and inequality, and warning that we may be underestimating the impacts of this within South Africa, and also in our response to the MTBPS, we said that the risks and how should take into account the impacts of inequality, and it's sort of generally agreed. If you look at the IMF, the World Bank, the OECD, United Nations agencies, they all point to that inequality is bad for growth, but it also makes government spending less efficient and less effective. And so in terms of underspending, but also the impact we have in terms of the Honorable Chair spoke about education and health, we need to understand both on the supply side from government and the service providers, but also on the demand side from the learners and the sick people, that levels of poverty and struggling, having poor infrastructure, poor services, but also having children who are going hungry or stunting. And as we said in our previous presentation, 27% of children in South Africa were stunted in 2020, but it was that same number going right back to 1997. And so we need to think about the systemic causes, not only this kind of specific inefficiencies within local governments or within government departments. So we have to recognize those impacts. The second point I wanted to make, and I really want to thank Honorable Chair and to some extent Honorable Mnzana for the space for Deputy Chair Sachs to almost give a lecture on government debt and finances. Because in a lot of these presentations, we're rushing for time. We've given 30 minutes to present, and FFC and PBO presenting in the same forum, and we sort of worry about not taking other people's time and eating up each other's time, and so we sort of become deliberately brief. But I'm glad that that Michael Sachs was given that space, and I'd like to just add 1 or 2 points to that. And I totally agree with him that the issue is about growth and interest rates. But for me, we need to actually be careful that our analysis is not static, and that we actually understand real life and the way the economy works and the way in which government works is in a dynamic environment, and that economies are integrated. And so we need to be careful that we talk about government finances and public finances almost as a separate account that's separate from the rest of the economy. And within that, when we talk about spending on social grants and social expenditure as something that's not part of what's driving the dynamism within the economy, the ability, and here coming back to my point about poverty, unemployment, and inequality as major constraints on growth and performance and the effectiveness of government spending, to understand how that's integrated. But also, from a macroeconomics perspective, we can think of the government as having one account and the private sector as having another account. And we have to see the two as integrated, not as separate. And so what's happening in the two accounts affect each other. And here's where the issues of growth and interest rates are really important, because government is a driver of growth. Government can be a driver of innovation. And as Dr. Jantjies is referring to the Minister of Finance's inputs at the book launch on structural transformation, that government can actually drive an economic restructuring, not just supply side structural reforms. So it's really important then to see social expenditure, particularly social grants, as Dr. Jantjies said, which has been the most effective way of dealing with inequality and unemployment, and the problem of structural unemployment and people not having jobs, and so providing them with livelihoods and reducing their levels of poverty and also reducing inequality. There hasn't been, I think, any program in government that has been as effective, and some of the evidence for this actually is in that withdrawn green paper from the department on comprehensive social security. The second point, so we need to, and we can support growth, and in that way reduce our debt to and our debt service to growth levels through growing. But also the second thing is to think about interest rates. And yes, this is where we need to open up the debate, because we often, and the way in which the FFC and to some extent the Treasury has been talking about debt, is that is a given and there's nothing we can do about it. We're just a price taker. And what central banks around the world have shown, especially developed country central banks, who are in a fortunate position because they're from rich countries and there's more demand for their money. There is an international hierarchy of currencies. And so we as a developing country fall into the less fortunate situation, but we have to examine what's happened. And the issue isn't only that they could do fiscal stimulus because they had access to lower interest rates, but it's because the governments, and it's particularly their central banks, said we are taking away the decisions about the rate at which the sovereign can borrow from speculators, from short-term seeking short-term high returns in global financial markets, and we are setting those interest rates. And that's where the discussion in South Africa has to go. What does the use of unconventional monetary policy after the global financial crisis, and now that it's become more and more conventional, mean for South Africa and the determination of interest rates and the role of the central bank? And that is an issue that I think we need to discuss. We need to understand how global financial markets work, how sovereign debt markets work, but also the role of governments and central banks in actually influencing those. So that's something I think, and within the pandemic, we saw the South African Reserve Bank and others, to some extent, play a role in those markets and influence interest rates. But also the central bank's role was much more about increasing liquidity. But we actually saw that what the developing countries did actually had a huge impact, and it actually didn't negatively affect them. The question now is, can we actually start incrementally changing that relationship and say that we are going to take more responsibility for our sovereign interest rate and how much we pay, so that, and as Michael was saying, you know, the paying interest to private sector actors is basically a redistributive thing from government to the rich, rather than government to the poor in the form of social grants. And we need to shift that relationship and look at how we actually reduce interest rates consciously and see ourselves as having agency within that. And the problem in South Africa, and the problem that we're getting from the discussions and the way the issues are presented from National Treasury, is that we have no agency. We are just price takers, we are victims. And so I'd like to stop there and say that we have a lot of food for thought. And again, I want to appreciate the chair's indulgence and thank him very much for these opportunities to talk about these kind of almost more abstract issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you so much. I think we have done too much time. What we'll do is that, Chair, will give it back to the committee. I don't know if other colleagues want to come in, but I know I always say this, that for any questions that we didn't answer, we really would like, committee to send us those questions. We can respond to them in writing. I don't know if there's any burning question, colleagues, just quickly, that you want to respond to. Okay, Chairperson, thank you so much. We give back to you.
That's fine. Thank you so much, FFC, PBO. I think picking up from what Commissioner Sachs basically was saying was that money costs money. Interest rate that we pay is the price of money, and then link that to the response by Dr. Siraj to say, let us not deal with the monetary and fiscal policy again in silos, right? So especially when it comes to the cost of capital, and which we are concerned about, that the debt service costs are growing at a very, very fast rate. But let's not pretend as if it's something which is outside the bigger government of South Africa, especially as it relates to the central bank, and as to how we deal with the sovereign debt. I think it's an interesting discussion which National Treasury doesn't get into it in most of their presentations. I think they do need National Treasury. You do need to deal with that as we go forward. It's even outside the question of whether you nationalize or don't nationalize the central bank. Is more about its role in a developing economy like ours. Just to throw those two in, I'd ask FFC, because FFC said we need to review the structure of conditional grants, and my question is what do they have in mind? Obviously, if they say we need to review that, it means there is something that they are thinking of as far as the conditional grants are concerned. National Treasury, are you on the platform? Would you like to pick up on any of the things that we have raised?
Good morning, Chairperson. This is Mampu Modise on the platform.
Welcome, Dogotela.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just turn my video. Hopefully the Chair and the honorable members can see us. Chairperson, just on the specifics of the question on what the allocated or the contingency reserve and the provisional allocation was for. If you just look at the E&E, basically, Chairperson, there were a number of expenditure that we funded during the year. So basically, the biggest one were the compensation of employees. We also funded the Department of Health for the vaccine rollout. So at the time of the budget, we increased the contingency reserve to 12 billion, basically to deal with some of the funding pressures that are going to come from the vaccine rollout. We also allocated funding, Chairperson, for the rollovers of about 2.8 billion. The self-financing expenditure, where most of the significant departments there is the Department of Home Affairs for the issuance of passports and IDs and all of those, and also the Department of Defense for the peacekeeping mission in the DRC. So those are the things that we also had to fund. So some of the money that was partially used to fund this was then the contingency reserve. But the provisional allocation, Chairperson, it's the money that was announced at the budget, but because we were still doing an evaluation with the presidency and the departments, that was the money for the employment youth initiative, where basically the money was allocated to the Department of Basic Education, National Treasury, DTIC, women, youth, and persons with disabilities, forestry, fisheries, social development, health, tourism, and other departments. That total, Chairperson, was about 10 billion or odd from the 11 billion that we allocated. So those two were the funding where the money was. But Chairperson, the details are there in the AE&E, the adjusted estimate of national expenditure, and also in the adjusted appropriation bill. But I thought, let me just clarify, Chair, those two allocations, what they were intended for. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Dr. Mampo. Before I let you go, the Val River issue, money, what's happening there? And I don't think I got an answer even the last time, because this is a project which has been there forever, and we seek not to to solve it. What's happening? And the money is not being used to make matters worse.
Yeah. Yeah, last time I was hoping that IGR was going to respond. But Chairperson, this thing is complicated because remember there was the time where the Defense Force was asked to go and intervene. They went to intervene, but the problem remains is that the people in the VAL, the vandalism is persistent, and once the department tries to fix something, when they go back again, there's the problem with exactly the same thing. So the department took over the project after the Defense Force finished off, but they really are struggling to complete the project. So I think what is fair, Chairperson, before I throw them under the bus, is for them to come and explain how far they are in the process and what mechanism they will be putting in place to deal with the vandalization of the infrastructure. But what is clear is that whatever we did with the Defense Force, from that point, we're not going forward. It seems as if we're going backwards, but I think it would be fair for the department to come and explain.
That's water and sanitation.
Yeah, well, that's water and sanitation, yes.
support staff, can we prepare a letter to water and sanitation where we get a proper explanation what is happening, and based on that response, we'll then decide whether we call him or not. But we need an explanation about this project. We can't be having projects which are forever with us, but they are never finalized. So I think that's one thing that we must definitely tick and see how we finalize that. And then if I were to give a part cost to FFC and PPO, and obviously you interact with Treasury when it comes to this, the grants which are perennially underperforming, right? Identify the grant for us, and then we have the reason why is that happening, and then the suggested solution to that, so that you can see whether we were able to finish some of these things. We can't have these things forever in our programs, and we seem not to be finishing them. Doctors, is that possible for you to do that for us?
Thank you, Chairperson. I think as the FFC, we note the part costs that you're giving to us, and we will consider it. Thank you so much.
Dr.
Chairperson, thank you so much. We will certainly do consider it because the work that we've done on the underspending, it's going to be a continuing work, which we want to understand the reasons for that as well, just broadly underspending. And hopefully by budget time, we'll give you some input in that regard. We'll definitely get the condition.
I will definitely just invite you so that we just focus on these grants and them not performing and so on, so that we can, as a committee, perhaps even apply our minds because of the importance, not just very important as far as service delivery is concerned. Our members always say, while they understand that Treasury can't be throwing money where it's not used, right? But at the same time, the impact of this on the ultimate beneficiaries is appreciated by this committee. So please do that work. And once we are done, you don't have a lot of time, indicate just to us that you are ready, because we would like to just engage with you, with yourselves, FFC, PBO, and National Treasury. But honorable members, I think that brings us to the end of the presentations by both the FFC and PBO. And thank you very much. I think we're able to give PBO and FFC more time to explain some of the things that always bother us. Thank you very much. We can go to the next agenda item. You may remain on the platform if you so desire, but we still have got about 2 or 3 other items in our agenda. But I think that's very much, let's continue engaging on the issues that have been raised by yourselves and those that have been raised by the honorable members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you so much.
Honorable members, Darren, there is a program, a revised program for the 4th term, and you'll realize, honorable members, that because of the local government elections, there were a lot of shifts that we had to make to ensure that we accommodate those things that statutorily this committee must deal with. So there is a draft revised program for the last term of 2021. I'll ask Darren to fly to that revised program for the 4th term of 2021. Darren?
Yes, Chairperson.
Let's go. Why are you? Okay, there you go. Just go over it quickly and read it for us.
Okay, Chair. Yes, today we had a briefing. On the 23rd of November, we had a briefing on IPBO and FFC. And then tomorrow we've got comment by Salga on the 2021 Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. And we also have public hearings on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. We only received one submission from COSATU in that regard. On Friday, we are considering and adopting our report on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. Next week, Tuesday, there will be the debate on the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill. And then on Wednesday, we've set aside a department for the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. However, that department has not yet been identified. So we just need to think about which department we want to see, or if we want two departments. And then on Friday, Chairperson, we've got public hearings. Friday, the 3rd of December, we've got public hearings on the 2021 MTBPS, as well as the 2021 Adjustments Appropriation Bill that will be jointly with the Select Committee on Appropriations. And then Tuesday, 7th December, we are hoping to consider and adopt our two reports, the report on the MTBPS and the Adjustments Appropriation Bill. Thank you, Chair.
Honourable members, as you can see, that takes us to the end of this term. So can we move on the basis of this program, honourable members?
Mlenzana.
Yes, Honourable Mlenzana.
Yes, I move, Chair.
Thank you. Seconder.
Mtaf, I second, Chair.
Thank you very much. I take it that we accept that that's how we're going to finish the fourth quarter. Can we go to agenda item number 7? As I reminded you yesterday, honourable members, we need to adopt these minutes. They were sent to us and we asked to read them. Can I have the mover of the minutes of the 15th of September 2021? Mover?
Yes, Chair Mlenzana, I've read them and I move.
Mlenzana moves. Seconder?
Kaiso.
Honorable Kaiso second. So we adopt the minutes of the 15th of September. Minutes of the 17th of September. Mover?
I move, Chair, Matafa.
Honorable Matafa moves. Seconder?
Mlenzana.
Honorable Mlenzana seconder. Minutes of the 21st of September 2021. Mover?
I move, Chair.
Honorable Matafa moves the adoption of the minutes of the 21st of September 2021. Seconder?
Mlenzana seconds, Chairperson.
Honorable Mlenzana seconds. Then we jump to this quarter. The minutes of the 16th of November 2021. Mover?
I move, Chair, Matafa.
Honorable moves for the adoption of the minutes of the 16th of November 2021. Right? And then the minutes of the 17th of November 2021.
Chairperson, let me second.
Okay.
Matafa was moving.
Okay. Matafa moved to the adoption of the 17th of November 2021, and Honorable Mlenzana seconded. Okay.
Yes, Chair.
Minutes adopted. So that takes care of agenda item number 7, honorable members. Can we go to agenda item number 8? Darren, any announcements from your side?
Chairperson, no announcements from my side, Chair. The link, the next meeting is tomorrow. I'm going to send the link immediately after this meeting as adjourned, Chair.
Thank you, Darren. Before we adjourn the meeting, honorable members, I think there are these things which trouble this committee, and it won't help us to continuously raise them, but we don't see the finalization of them. For instance, the question of underspending. I've asked the staff to identify those departments and And if we can't meet them, let's write letters to them so that they can tell us exactly what are they doing with that. Because the implications of underspending, both economically and socially, are just too much. So we need to as we play our oversight, I think that's one area that we really need to look at. Deprive our people of much needed services. But again, what we are trying to do as a country to jumpstart the economy of this country, we are also failing because money in the bank does not create jobs. And another point that we always say is that money costs money. We borrow that money, but after that, we don't use it. And let's find a way of closing that. And I will suggest that once we've identified those departments, we must also write to the respective portfolio committees or standing committees to follow up on the issues that we have raised. How does that sound?
Great, Chair.
Yes, Chairperson, I also agree. Chairperson.
Yes.
And just as a writer, Chairperson, if
yes.
as we write to the department, Darren could begin to be a little specific, so that when they come, they must be clear of what is it that we would want them to respond to.
Yeah. Darren, you'll draft that with Fiscal, and I will have to see those letters before they go out.
Yes, Chairperson.
Great.
I think in our communication, it should not only reflect capturing this period, because it should also reflect that specific history. So that, I mean, that element of perpetuality must be very explicit, that what we are referring to. Yeah.
Thanks, Honorable Kaiso. I think we'll definitely have to do that, right? Where we'll say that we're noticing a trend here. But you remember we also spoke about water and sanitation, and in particular the VAL issue. Let's also get explanations about that, right? Okay. All members, I think we had quite a fruitful meeting, very engaging, and that takes us to the end of this meeting. And there is a meeting. When's the next meeting? Tomorrow.
Yes, Chairperson, 9 o'clock tomorrow.
9 o'clock tomorrow. So let's meet 9 o'clock tomorrow. But thank you very much, all members. The meet and support staff, everybody's on the platform. Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. No, thanks, Chairperson. Thanks, Chairperson. Bye.
Bye. Yes, Musa.
Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you. Noliolo, Nyakbon.
Hi, Chairperson.
Yeah. Fiscal. Okay, and all of you other members, thank you very much. And our staff, see you tomorrow, virtually.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.